Good morning, Dumelang, Sanibonani, Molweni, Goeiemorgen. Welcome to the annual Risk Management webinar hosted by the University of South Africa, UNISA. And for today, our partners, Rubik, Tinswalo Lodges, NutriSeed, CyberOne Global, TIS, Safcol, and IntDev. My name is Michael du Toit. I'm from the Department of Marketing and Retail Management at UNISA, and I'll be facilitating this discussion today. Welcome. Looking around online and in the news, the headlines just jump out at you. From the Global Treasurer, no end in sight for global supply chain chaos, say treasurers. From Wired magazine, the supply chain crisis is about to get a lot worse. From the supplychaindigital.com, chaos is the new normal for supply chain. And even from Bloomberg, COVID supply chain chaos is just a dress rehearsal for what's next. And that brings us nicely to the topic of today's webinar, and that is about the impact of supply chain risks. It's my honor to introduce Professor Ashley Mutezo. Ashley has been a colleague of mine for more than 15 years at UNISA and is a professor in risk management. Professor Mutezo will be doing the official welcome on behalf of UNISA. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Program Director. A warm welcome to each one of you who has joined us in person or virtually this morning, whether local or international. Special greetings to our speakers, our sponsors, partners, and all our attendees. On behalf of UNISA and Rubik, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our third operational risk webinar, which we host annually. This year's theme is Level Up, the New World of Supply Chain Risk Management. Every organization will need to increase efforts on supply chain risk identification, assessment, and management within the extended enterprise. We will explore the key themes affecting global supply chains and how these risks can be identified, assessed, and monitored to improve overall risk management in a rapidly changing world, when often so much is unknown. So in recent incidents that influence South Africa are the COVID-19 pandemic, the KZN floods, the Eastern Cape drought, load shedding, the strike of the truck drivers at the Moy River most recently, and the Transnet strike. These combined increase supply chain uncertainty. A special welcome to our keynote speakers and panelists who will share their experiences and current perspectives on supply chain risk. This includes Mrs. Gay Corbett, Mrs. Nadine Hardy-Silcock, Christelle Murray, Dr. Terry Ramabulana, Mr. Jason O'Reilly. We continue to appeal to corporate and public sectors that if you have a topic in operational risk that needs further research, please get in touch with us. We will make these research areas available to our master's and doctoral students for further investigation. Thank you once again for joining us this morning, and welcome everyone. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the webinar. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Professor. We are indeed looking forward to today's program and our speakers. This year, we are excited to welcome two exceptional keynote speakers. In line with our theme, as I said, the impact of supply chain risks, we are privileged to have the opportunity to hear from two C-level executives as they unpack fascinating insights to the realities of dealing with unique supply chain risks within the tourism sector, as well as a small business navigating the wholesale and retail supply chains. Our first keynote speaker is Mrs. Gay Corbett, the CFO of the Tinswalo Lodges Group. Gay has been in property development industry for more than 40 years and believes that success is not measured in material things, but rather in how much value you bring to the world around you. Immediately following Mrs. Corbett is Mrs. Nadine Hardy-Silcock, the owner of not one, not two, but 3 small businesses. Nadine runs NutriSeed, a health and wellness food company. Separate to that, a private label health and wellness manufacturing company, and the Health Food Emporium retail stores. Please join me in welcoming Gay Corbett and then Nadine Hardy-Silcock. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gay Corbett. I'm the co-founder with my husband of the group of Tinswalo Luxury Hotels. We currently have 7 lodges, one called Tinswalo Atlantic, which is situated on Chapman's Peak Drive. The other one is Tinswalo at Boulders, which is overlooking the penguins at Simonstown. Then there are 2 in the Manuleti, which is inside the Greater Kruger. One is called Tinswalo Manor House, and the other one is Tinswalo Safari Lodge. Then there are 2 in Welgevonden and in the Waterberg. One is in Welgevonden, called Tinswalo Family Camp. The other one is Tinswalo at Lapalala, which is in the greater wilderness area of Lapalala. And then the 7th one is Tinswalo at Tsiankaba, which is an island in the Zambezi, just above the falls. Now, Tinswalo is a Shangaan word, and it has the meaning of the feeling of love and gratitude you feel for someone who has given you a worthwhile gift, or it's a blessing, which is what our hotels are. We feel that our lodges, we give our guests a worthwhile gift and they love us in return. In fact, one of our standards is if a guest doesn't cry when they leave, then we've done something wrong. So we really pride ourselves for producing a really good product that people want to come back to. The first lodge we built nearly 20 years ago, which was Tinswalo Safari Lodge. And since then, we've just expanded into the other ones. In the tourism industry has been one of the hardest hit industries during the COVID pandemic. We were definitely hardest hit because of the fact that it closed us down completely in the beginning, and it's been a very long recovery time. We seem to go in fits and starts too, just like in 2021, we thought that it was coming back again. In December 2021, we were fully booked with overseas guests, which was incredible. You know, we were jumping for joy and being very happy. And Ramaphosa announced the Omicron, and within 2 days, we lost 2 million rands worth of bookings. Now, it's almost impossible to fill the hotels with local travel once that kind of thing happens, because most people have already booked their holidays. So it was a tremendous loss for us. And again, it just knocked us back into a situation of dire straits. One of the decisions that we made as a group was that when the original pandemic hit, we decided that we were not going to retrench our staff. A lot of the other lodges retrenched their staff, and so they had very minimal costs. We decided that that's something we couldn't do. We couldn't just throw our staff, some of which have worked for us for 20 years. We couldn't just throw them out. So we kept paying. We didn't pay full salaries, but we certainly made sure that every single one of our staff members were at least given a living wage. We fed them and we gave them enough money so that their families could at least eat. It was a stupid decision in one area because it drained the coffers completely. But in another area, it brought us so much loyalty from our staff that I think we could just about do anything now, and they would stick to us. When I was asked to talk on the supply chain disruptions, I was quite perplexed because it's not an area that I've really covered before. But when I went into it and started to dig and see how the supply chain disruptions have affected the lodge, it's of huge magnitude. So I'll just dive in on the first one, which obviously it's a very obvious one, and that's the electricity supply chain. Now, that has hit us in the lodge business very hard. We have, obviously, we have huge generators, and once the electricity goes down, the generators kick in. In the Manuletti, which is sort of at the end of the electricity, end of the supply, because we're so much into the reserve, the electricity goes off and has been going off for at least 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening. Now, we have to run the generators for that amount of time. That supply chain puts us in a position where we're paying huge fuel bills. And I couldn't understand why our electricity bill was going up at a huge rate, and yet we were off for nearly 8 hours a day. And then to my horror, I discovered that what happens is, because the electricity comes on, all 24 geysers go on at the same time. And when the 24 geysers go on at the same time, it spikes the kVA and puts us into a bracket of the billing that is way beyond what we should be pulling. And the Eskom don't take that into account. Once you've spiked once, then your electricity bill is calculated at the increased kVA, and that remains in place for a year. And I think a lot of people are wondering why, when there's all these outages, their bill's going up, and it's going up at a huge percent. Not only are they increasing the tariffs, but because your electricity is spiking, it goes into a different bracket, and you charge penalties. So we have the penalties for the electricity. We have the extra costs for the fuel. We have the extra costs for the generator, because the generator is running and we have to service it so often, because otherwise it's just going to conk out. Then on top of that, we get the appliances are under tremendous load, and a lot of our appliances keep shorting out. We have to put surge protectors onto all our computers. And these are all extra costs that we've never, ever really had to face before. Another area of supply that has really hit us very hard, and that's the fuel price. Now, we spend a lot of money, particularly in the game lodges, on fuel, because we're taking people for game drives. So the fuel cost has gone up so high that a typical game drive costs twice as much as it used to cost. So now we're saying to our guides, don't go so far, and they're going to have to work out, and they're having to work twice as hard to get the same type of experience for our guests as they did when they could move more freely in the reserve. Another area which has hit us tremendously is the repairs and maintenance on the vehicles, because Toyota, well, all our vehicles are cruisers, and Toyota, after the floods in KwaZulu-Natal, their supply of parts has dried up completely. So we've got to be very careful that we don't break any of our vehicles, and we are going off-road all the time. So they're under tremendous strain. But we, put the fear of God in our guides to preserve those vehicles, because if they break, there's no way to fix them, which takes a vehicle right out of the pool that we use in the game vehicles. One of the other areas where the supply chain is hitting us is the cost of food. Now, our food, we've always traditionally served food at a cost of 300 Rand per person per day in the lodge. Now, because of the food supply being so short and the difficulty in sourcing certain foods that we serve in the lodges, like, it could be fish, or it could be other stuff that's really not readily available, our food costs have now gone up to 600 Rand a person. This is a huge impact on our viability, because we traditionally in the lodge business set our rates a year to 2 years in advance. So 2 years ago or a year ago, we set our rates for what we're selling our bed nights for today. Those bed nights cannot be changed. We cannot now in the middle of the year say we're increasing our prices. The agents will not take it. They insist that we stick to our rates that we gave them a year ago. So the margins are being very squeezed with the increase in petrol, the increase in food, and the increase in electricity. And we cannot change that at all. So we just have to try our best to see how we can slide through this year so that next year we can increase our rates. And then who knows, maybe people can't afford it anymore. It's stupid little things like the supply chain of uniforms. We can't get uniforms for our staff because the lady and Hoedspruit that makes the uniforms can't make the uniforms when there's load shedding. So she's got a huge backlog because she's making for a lot of the lodges. So you just really have to sit and wait your turn until her machines can make enough uniforms to actually produce our uniforms. So our staff are starting to look quite tatty because they haven't had new uniforms for 2 years now. Another area where the supply chain is really breaking down is in insurance. We've been informed by our insurance companies that we have to have all our lodges revalued. Now, this is an expensive little exercise, but they say that if for some reason the lodges are burned down, or there's a flood, or there's some kind of catastrophe, and we haven't reinsured, the building industry, the prices have increased so hugely that we'd never ever be able to replace the lodge for what we have insured presently. So we have to go through a whole process of revaluing and then pushing up our insurance, which is a very costly exercise. And we have actually, Transwalo Atlantic has burnt down twice. So I know what the catastrophe is that occurs when the lodge burns down. So we can't possibly afford to not go through the whole process. The other aspect to it is that, you insure for loss of income during the rebuilding time. Now, because of the lack of building materials and steel, you can't get materials quickly. So our building time would be a lot longer than previously, which means that we've got to increase our insurance when we're not operating. So it's a huge big factor. Now, when we were setting up our new restaurants, we were hit with the increase in steel price because all the kitchens, the steel price really affects the price of all the steel in the kitchens. All the tables are steel, the ovens are steel, the canopies, everything is made of steel. And now, not only can you not get the steel, the manufacturers are really pushing up their prices to the point where it's almost impossible to do it. So then the next sort of area where we are having difficulty is the replacement costs of stuff. I don't know if you've ever been in a restaurant where you hear that clang and 15 plates get dropped off the counter, and I go, oh my gosh, that's 20 Rand a plate that you've just squashed. Well, now it's not 20 Rand a plate now, it's 40 Rand a plate. And the ability to replace some of that stuff is getting harder and harder. A lot of our imported stuff, which we were very proud of, we can no longer get now because the imports are starting to get very difficult. So we have to go local, and the local quality is not so good. It's good in the fact that we are supporting our local industries, but it definitely is a different quality to what we were used to. The next thing that really has affected us tremendously is airfares. Now, being in the industry where airfares are tremendously important, we have, as far as local travel is concerned, we've been hit terribly. There are only 2 airlines that are really functioning. Things like Kulula, BOAC, SAA, they've all gone down. We literally have SA Airlink, FedAir, and one called Lyft. So all the planes are absolutely packed. So to get our guests because we have a circuit, we go Cape Town, the lodge in Manuleti, and then we go up to Victoria Falls. For us to get that circuit going internally is terribly difficult. Those planes are absolutely and utterly packed. Then we have the added irritation or catastrophe of international airfares. Most of our guests are high end. They like to travel business class, or they don't like to go economy from America to here. It's a long trip. They want to go business class or above. And a business class ticket today costs 180,000 Rand. So it just becomes almost impossible for these people to come out. And our major occupancy is actually from America. That's where we're getting most of our guests. Europe is not traveling so much anymore. The Germans are very hesitant, and the English are not traveling. It's mainly the Americans. I don't know why they're being so brave at the moment, but they are definitely coming out. But their airfares are climbing and climbing and climbing. So it's making it more difficult for them to come out, which really does affect us. One of the stupid little things that we really get affected by the supply chain is ice. You wouldn't think that ice is so important, but when you've got 40 degrees in the bush, the guests want ice, and we just cannot get ice because the electricity is going off all the time, and the ice makers that usually deliver ice to us, they can't make their ice because the generators can't produce enough electricity to actually produce the ice. So we sit without ice, and it's a huge thing for the guests. They go, but no, you can't serve us a drink without ice. And it's true. You can't go to a 5-star lodge and sit there and have a gin and tonic and have no ice in it. It's a stupid thing, but it is of great importance. One of the biggest barriers that we're hitting in the industry at the moment is that the booking system works in a way that somebody makes an inquiry, you put the inquiry in, that inquiry stays there on the system and blocks those rooms for 2 weeks until the person makes up their mind whether they're going to book or they're going to release the booking. Now what's happening is we're finding that our guests won't make up their minds as to whether they're going to travel or not, because they don't know whether they are going to be allowed to travel. So they never confirm their bookings until 2 weeks out. Now, traditionally, we used to have bookings 4, 5, 6 months in advance. Now we don't have that anymore. We literally have people phoning in, they put their names down, they sit there. We don't want to drop them off the system because we don't want to lose that client, but they will not confirm and pay until they're almost 2 weeks out. Then when they think it's safe to go, South Africa is not going to come out in monkeypox or something, they confirm, pay, and they come. And that makes the predict very difficult. We don't want to drop them off, but at the same time, it blocks that room in case some other guest decides to come. And it also makes the prediction of the lodge very difficult, because now they're trying to prepare 2 weeks out to serve the food, get the food in, get the beverages in, get the wine in. It's a very difficult thing to cope with in the lodges. So, like any good South African, I think we are very positive in a lot of the things that we do. I hate the saying boer maak 'n plan, but it really does give an idea of how resilient South Africans are. We always make a plan and we always try and look at the good side of whatever's happening. We, as I said before, we have kept all our staff, so they're fiercely loyal and they are very happy to think out of the box. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to think out of the box. We've got to think of different ways that we can beat this pandemic or this whatever situation the planet is in. Just for example, they came to us and said, the staff came to us and said, listen, we've got plenty of land. We want to make a vegetable garden. So we've created these huge vegetable gardens in all the game lodges. Now, it's quite a trick to keep the elephants out because the elephants also like vegetable gardens. But our fertilizers for free. We don't have any supply chain disruptions there. We just go into the bush and collect all the elephant dung we can. We mix it in with the soil, and we've got huge vegetable gardens. So the staff themselves are starting to not only feed themselves, but they are supplying the lodge with a fantastic amount of fresh vegetables, salads, fruit. We've the vegetable garden that we've built, we've even started to serve high tea in the vegetable garden so that the guests can actually have a look at what the staff are doing to actually create their own food supply. Then we had our chef come to us and say he doesn't want to use sugar anymore. He wants to use honey. He's got this idea to have beehives. So we built these little cages, because if you don't have the beehives in the cages, the honey badgers come and just annihilate them. So we've got electrified cages, and we've got the bees inside the electrified cages, and he's devised this little contraption that you just turn on you go to the back of the hive, you turn on the tap and the honey pours out. I mean, how innovative. There's really ways and means for lots of things to happen. The other thing that we've done is we have involved a lot of the local community in things like making uniforms, because we can't get uniforms out of the traditional uniform makers. There's little ladies in the communities that can make cushions. They can do uniforms. They repair torn tablecloths. They do a lot of work for us. They make covers for the canvas covers so that we can preserve our furniture. So that's another area that would never have happened had it not been for COVID. Another area that we have really put a lot of attention on is our curio store. You know, the curio store is very popular with the tourists, and we have made sure that 90% of all the goods in our curio store are locally made goods. So it's from the local community. It's from as far away as Natal. People make jars, honey jars. We've got local artists painting. We've got people weaving. It's made a huge difference to the community, and we enjoy selling them in the shop. And the tourists actually prefer that. They don't really want to get the imported stuff because that's a bit stupid, you know, which we never would have done before. We would have always got the very high priced imported stuff in our curio store. Now we are selling mostly local made products. Okay. And then possibly the biggest advantage of all is the fact that we have tremendous staff. As I said before, they're fiercely loyal. They pull together, they think of ideas, and if they have a little bit of hardship, they don't care. They just know that if they've got to work extra time, they do so. If they've got to put in a little bit more effort, they do so. And we do a lot of training with them. It's given us an opportunity to be able to train them better. We film their activities, and then we play it back to other staff so that everybody gets to the same standard. And we never, ever would have been able to do that had we been so rushed off our feet like we were before. You know, all the standards slipped and we were just rushing to produce a product. Now we're actually watching what we produce and producing a fantastic product. Thank you.
Good day. My name is Nadine Hardy-Silcock, and just so you know who I am, I'm running 3 businesses at the moment. I have a company called NutriSeed, a company called Berry Blossom, and I have 2 store outlets called the Health Food Emporium and the Health Food Pantry. But personally, I am a wife and a mom of 2 and a serial entrepreneur, and I love innovation in the food space. So I'm here today to talk about my story with my businesses and how we are affected by our logistics, and how every day is a new day in terms of running small businesses and getting our products to market. So this is a little bit about our business. This is our retail sector business. This is NutriSeed, which holds NuSeed and NuMe. So NuSeed is a snacking category product, and we have developed this product for the health food industry, and it is now going into Dis-Chems, and previously we were in most of retail in South Africa. So just a little bit about the product. It's quite lifestyle products. They're all healthy snacks, and they are roasted seeds and trail mixes that are in small little sachets that are convenient for you to take in your lunchbox or in your handbag and have a healthy snack during your day. Then we have NuMe, and NuMe is a healthy baking line, And we've produced them for the keto market and also for the diabetic market. And people can take them home and they can bake them and have a guilt-free indulgence. So here's a little bit about these products. We've got brownies, we've got muffins, something called a cake in a cup, and we also have a very healthy bread. Right, the other company that we own is a private label contract manufacturing business where we do a lot of the health foods contract manufacturing, and that is tailored for the health food industry. We do quite a lot of innovation behind this business on behalf of retailers. And we specialize in health food manufacturing, packing, sourcing, procuring, and also we have a test kitchen where we can help innovate on our clients' behalf. This is a little bit about our factory. We are a full FSSC certified factory, and we are able to produce export quality products that can go overseas. And here is one of the lines that we put a lot of effort behind. This is the lifestyle foods range for Dis-Chem. We do a lot of innovation for them. We are currently shipping approximately 2 million rands worth of stock every month to their warehouse on a weekly basis. Right, this is one of our little happy places. This is the Health Food Emporium. So this is the brainchild that we had at an overflow of our stock, bringing health foods to our community. And this is where our community can come and buy healthy products at a much more reasonable cost. So right, let's get into the retail monster. So by mid-2020, we were supplying Dis-Chem, Clicks, Spars, Pick n Pay, Food Lovers, and we had just been listed with Checkers. At this stage, we were a very small player in the game, but we were distributing all the way around the country. And this posed quite a few issues for us in terms of our supply chain. So NutriSeed was given the Pick n Pay Small Supplier Award in mid-2020, where it is a small chamber of small suppliers that are assisted in a big industry of retail, and where they can get certain rebates and certain benefits to get their products to market. So what we realized in mid-2020 was that there seemed to be an issue with understanding the difference between our retail sector with NutriSeed and our contract manufacturing. We decided to split our businesses and look at them differently financially, so we could see where we were losing money. And what we found was we were losing approximately 2 million rand a year through our retail sector through NutriSeed. So when we analyzed the figures, we realized that there were certain percentages of costs going to certain areas of our logistics, merchandising, distribution, and there was a huge amount going into obsolete stock. And when we looked closely, we were able to see that these were the things that were draining the business of finances. So if you know how retail works, the retailers take anything between 15 and 25% straight off the bat on your product, and that is for their logistics. But however, they require you to be in every single region in the country so that you can supply directly into their DCs in their particular regions. So we then had to source a logistics and regional warehousing that would be in every region holding our stock. So we were paying approximately 8% for that. And that was obviously turning around. And if it was not sold, we would have to pay for the pallet space as well. Then on the merchandising side, we were paying approximately 10% to merchandisers nationwide. And what that did was it helps remove your stock out of their storerooms and put it onto the shelves. So we being a smaller supplier, we were in the same basket as much bigger suppliers like maize meal and rice and that type of thing. So when it came to merchandising our product on shelf, we always got second best. So we were struggling to find our way onto shelves, onto the right places, and it was very difficult to control from a small base here in Johannesburg. Another thing that was quite prevalent is that we were sitting with quite a bit of obsolete stock. And obsolete stock is not just stock that has gone over its sell-by date. It is quite a lot of pilferage, damage, and overstocks. So the stores ordering too much stock and not able to sell it. And because our stock was also very delicious, a lot of the stock started disappearing from the storerooms. So we had to have a reality check. We had 1 year of trading, was losing 2 million Rand. We were chasing payments from big corporate accounts, and we had a huge amount of stressed out staff. So we had to make a call, and we had to make a decision to only supply one of the retailers, and that we chose was Dis-Chem for these particular reasons. Because we were doing a lot of the private label for Dis-Chem already, we were already sending truckloads of stock through to their DC, which NutriSeed was able to piggyback on. The lovely thing about Dis-Chem is that they accept stock in one DC, which was in Johannesburg, and they distribute nationally on behalf of their suppliers. Their rebates were also a lot lower, and their merchandising fees are also a lot lower. So we decided to make the call and just stick with one of them. And it has actually worked out a lot better for us. So what we decided to do is, instead of trying to get our products all over the country, was to consolidate and put a lot more focus into our own retail stores. We could control it better, and we could control the stock going through, and we could obviously then supply directly to the public at a lower cost. So we opened up Blueberry, which was our new store called the Health Food Pantry, and we were able to now target a huge amount of customers in those particular areas in Johannesburg. So then what we've decided also to do is to do an online site. So instead of having logistics and running around all over South Africa, we decided to leave that to the couriers and do what we're good at. We are good at health foods, at innovation, and at packing stock, and they are good at distribution. So what we also decided to do is do our own internal innovation. So instead of innovating for the likes of a Clicks or the likes of a Pick n Pay, we decided to innovate within our own stores and give our customers the innovation through couriering the stock directly to their door. And these are a few of our products. We're doing healthy detox drinks, honey infusions. We've got lovely healthy spreads. So we had a fateful day where our current truck, which was delivering to the likes of Dis-Chem and to a few smaller customers, unfortunately was written off. So that put us in another situation where we thought, well, how do we handle our own logistics now? Do we purchase another truck? But we were given another opportunity to do reverse logistics through Dis-Chem. They allowed us to now have one of their trucks come back from one of their stores to come and collect the stock and bring it directly to their own warehouse. Now that benefits us because we don't have to have any drivers anymore, and we don't have to obviously pay wear and tear on a truck that we only use once a week. So that was an actual saving for us. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to have stock, and because it would be their truck, they have priority into the DC. We don't have drivers sitting at warehouses all day waiting for the stock to arrive through their DC doors. Our next adventure now is farming, and we are looking forward to getting product, GMO-free product, to our customers through couriers instead of through corporate retail. And that is our next adventure. Thank you very much.
A big thank you to both our speakers. As an academic, it's really refreshing to see a real world perspective on the challenges that our small business owners are facing. It's time for our first poll of the morning. So please vote on the poll question as it appears on your screen. Question is, do you think the ability to change and adapt was one of the biggest drivers for organizational survival during the past 2 years? So just vote on the poll and let's see what everybody thinks. I I personally think that both of our keynote speakers addressed critical elements of organizational adaptability and change in these times of crisis, whether it was Tinswalo, changing uniform suppliers, or even coming up with alternative sources of supply of ice in the middle of the Kruger National Park, or NutriSeed, realizing that you need to play to your own strengths in the distribution channel. And you don't need to be all things to all men. I think if COVID taught us anything, besides the value of toilet paper, it taught us that in this world of risk management, successfully mitigating risks often relies on being able to react and to adapt quickly. So let's have a look at the results of our voting in that poll. Can I have them on screen there? Seems like we're still busy voting on the poll. Tell us what you think about whether or not that ability to change and adapt was one of the biggest drivers for organizational survival. All right, we're going to go on to we'll come back to the poll and we'll have a look at those results. I'd like to think that we were all in agreement on the votes over there, but we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. So let's move on to the next item of today's agenda, which is for me to introduce our panel of experts. We are going to listen to a brief presentation from each of the members of our panel. And while they're talking, I would encourage you to please put your questions and your comments either in the chat box or in the Q&A on Zoom. And after the speakers have each had a turn, we will address your questions in a panel discussion. So in the order that we're going to be meeting our guests, let me begin by introducing Christelle Volmarais. Christelle is a risk management professional and the group CRO for the South African Forestry Company Limited, that's SAFCOL. She has a wealth of experience and background in many verticals of risk, including integrated GRC, treasury risk, credit risk, and operational risk. Our second panel member is Dr. Terry Ramabulana, who is the founding managing director of TIS Holdings and Veritas Advisory Services. Dr. Terry is a highly active member of the audit and risk community of South Africa. And finally, Jason O'Reilly. Jason has been a cybersecurity professional for over 23 years and is the cyber risk manager at CyberOne Global. Jason has spent many years understanding how cyber criminals operate, and as a result, has a wealth of experience and understanding to bring to clients in resilient and sustainable solutions. Let's meet our
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to chat to you today about supply chain risk management from a risk manager's perspective. And I think the first thing we need to note is not to take ourselves too seriously. And our first credit goes to Douglas Adams, one of the authors that explains what happens if a supply chain breaks down completely. And secondly, understand what happened in the past and how it affects us. And there has been times in the past when we thought the world would end and how we worked through that. And then also don't have your own biases and your own agendas overshadow what you're doing in risk management. There's always a view from nowhere, and that view is very important. And then lastly, thinking about how do we process data and how do we think about lots of information in a synergistic way. Peter Bernstein, Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk. So is this the end of the world as we know it? And I think a lot of people were wondering about that in the last 50 years, but then we're not unique in history. We've been there, we've done that, and we shouldn't be in denial. And what do we do now? So always start at the beginning and connect the dots all the time. And always, if you need to connect the dots, you need to have a lot of dots to connect. And then find the view from nowhere and think about the big picture. What is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? And how do we create the future out of that? And how do we stick to the plan and adapt as we need to change? We need to know what to look out for and what to do about it, especially around supply chain risk management. And then the last thought is about spending more time on the balcony than on the dance floor. Also, there's a staircase between the two that needs to be navigated. So let's start in the past. There was a time about 3,000 years ago where the world as we know it today existed almost in a similar way. There were some trade agreements, sanctions implemented, wars, earthquakes, natural disasters, etc. And at some point, it all became too much. And one of the key triggers for that was a supply chain breach between Egypt and the Hittite state, which happened at the island of Crete. So if you're interested in more detail on that, read Eric Klein's book. But the point is that there were a lot of similarities between the two periods. We have a palace economy like we have today in terms of severe inequalities, and also natural disasters, earthquake, volcanic eruptions like we do today, tsunamis and heat waves. There were very strained living conditions. Today, 75,000 people per year die of famine, similar to those times, and large-scale migrations of people. For instance, in the last 50 years, migration increased from about 50,000 people per year to more than 250,000. Economic disruptions, military action, new technologies that influenced how people lived in those days. So we've been there, we know what to do. But if we're in denial, we have a problem. And one of the key things here is that while you're living in the process, you don't notice it so much. You're like the proverbial frog that boils while you're busy dying. So fish did not discover water and they live in it so they don't see it. And I think that's a key thing for us as supply chain risk managers to think about. So how do you start? We all know about systems thinking about the framework, seeing the whole, not looking at the individual parts only. And that's not enough if you don't apply critical thinking. So it doesn't mean you disparage everything, but you understand what is based on fact and what is based on assumptions. Taking that into the processing of all of that information, and that's where AI comes in. AI will do our analytical thinking for us, and we need to make sure that we apply the human mind at the right place. Holistic thinking is a combination of critical, analytic, and systems thinking. And then the last thing that we need to take into account is, as risk managers, do we understand the behavioral and leadership skills of our leaders? Do we know what decisions they're going to make? On what are they basing it? Probability theory, game theory, motivation theory? What is driving them? And then lastly, you must tie all of this together by understanding as a risk manager the behavioral and leadership skills and decisions that will be made in your organization. So how do your leaders make decisions? Presentation skill is what you need and facilitation skill is what you need to drive the right decisions. Understand how they make decisions, the probability theory that drives them, the motivational theory and game theory that they apply. So start at the top. And I think the important thing is whether you think of a council or a public sector entity governing body or a private sector board of directors, they've got 4 jobs or 4 duties in their job spec. They need to set and steer the direction of the organization, approve the policy and planning that will enable it, oversee and monitor that it's happening, and then ensure accountability if things don't go wrong or go wrong. And they need to achieve 4 outcomes out of that. And in terms of King 4, those are number 1 is the ethical culture, good performance in terms of their mandate, effective control, and lastly, legitimacy in the eyes of the people that they work with. Customers, suppliers, societies, everybody needs to understand why you're there and that they agree with that. How do you do that as a director? There's a textbook, and that's called King 4. And the 17 principles guides directors on how to achieve good governance. While doing that, unfortunately, you need to think of 3 fundamental corporate paradigm shifts. We're no longer talking short-term capital markets. We're thinking of long-term sustainable markets, inclusive capitalism, not only financial capital, and thinking about siloed reporting into integrated reporting. While doing that, take into account the triple context, people, planet, and prosperity, and the 6 capitals to make sure you don't have any blind spots. And as if that's not enough, keep an eye on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And lastly, PRISA principles for responsible investment. So if you're the director and this is what you need to do, who connects the dots for you? And you'll see that in this cycle, risk management plays a part, but it is not the sole. In other words, you need to anchor the risk management process. In South Africa, we know that the single point of failure for us all is Eskom and the provision of electricity, and that is a huge threat to supply chain in corporate and across borders into Africa and into the globe. What can it turn out like? What does our scenarios look like based on that reality? And is our strategy able to respond to each of those scenarios as they play out? Then is your risk appetite framework aligned to that strategy? And can you do the risk management mitigation strategies that you need to stay relevant? And then lastly, in terms of governance, can you correct course when you need to? That's very important. So I'm not going to go into detail on the 6 capitals, but it helps you to avoid the blind spots. So instead of only thinking about the money, think about the intellectual, the human, and the social capital that you affect. So in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the question to what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. And why is that? Nobody knew, and they had to apply a computer AI to find the question, for which the answer was 42. And I think it's important, if we talk risk appetite, that it's not some random number that we think up. It has to be anchored in strategy, and that's a discussion we can have at some other time. Again, make sure that you take everything into account and your biases don't influence you. So I've taken an example about scenario planning from the UNISA risk report, which is a public document. And how do you determine your scenarios? You think about society, national policy, the economy, and the world. How does that influence your organization? And you come up with your scenarios for your organization. And how do you know which one is busy happening? You have your flags or your key indicators that sits in your AI and picks up when something is busy happening contrary to what you expected. And then you understand your risk profile, what happens if you don't manage your risks, and what happens if you do. And if you have that picture in mind, you can achieve your goals without necessarily having to redesign everything when something unexpected happens. So stick to the plan, but adapt, and adapt again. Understand the 6 capitals and the triple context for sustainability. Then build your strategy on that, link to your risks and your scenarios, and then you can apply your risk management process. So in terms of supply chain, what do we need to look out for over the next few years? I'm not necessarily going to talk into detail, but these topics on the screen are the ones that will definitely disrupt certain supply chains, not only in South Africa or across Africa, but globally. Water, we know, is a key issue. Ocean freight bottlenecks, continuous changing of workplace environments, just-in-time versus just-in-case, and the costs involved in that, increased regulatory scrutiny, data and threats to data and connectivity, political and government changes is huge, and then supplier consistency linked to also demand consistency. People's demand patterns are changing. Economic stability, and then extreme weather events, environmental impacts, and then catastrophes, and how do you secure your sustainability and your resiliency in that environment? So in closing, we need to understand the values-based behavior of our customers, and we need to balance the need for profitability and keep things lean with the cost of resiliency in the supply chain. Supply chain 4.0, people typically think it's about application of technology, big data, IoT, AI, bots, but it's not. It's about using that technology to see the big picture, to understand what just happened, why did it happen, what you should be doing next, and what will stop you from doing that, and how you can make it happen. Proactive and continuous systems thinking, analytical thinking, critical thinking is absolutely key. So last thing, never panic. Look at the picture from, or the dance floor from the balcony. And if you don't end up where you planned, end up as close as that as possible. Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Terry Ramabulana. I specialize in information management and specifically looking after areas of maturity assessment in different domains. Today, I'll be talking about risk management in the supply chain as it relates to the impact it makes in the supply chain environment. A quick definition of supply chain risk management is defined as a process that takes into account strategic steps that can help organizations, manufacturers to identify, analyze, assess, and finally mitigate the risk from a supply chain disruption or anticipated disruption. Having said that, the past few years have seen us going through a lot of disruption, and this was brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, and this had an impact, a significant impact in the way people start thinking. However, with a great supply chain management strategy and a good understanding and strategic plan of how you're going to mitigate the risks, there are big benefits that can be derived from such a plan. A few that I can put on the table, these are the following. One, increased security. And this has to link back to cybersecurity aspects. And a lot of organizations today have taken cognizance of that and are taking serious steps in making sure that cybersecurity is an aspect or is a strategy that is being implemented to make sure that they don't fall short when such an occurrence takes place. The second benefit of supply chain risk management strategy is that you benefit from customer satisfaction, in that you position yourself well to such an extent that the customer will be very satisfied with your continuous service, which is of high standard, uninterrupted, without failure. At the same time, the last point that I would like to put on the table is the issue of competitive advantage. The more you deliver your service and the more you have good relations with your third parties, the more the customer is satisfied, the more your environment is secured, the more you derive what we call competitive advantage. And this is something that is very important in any business, because if you lose your competitive advantage, it's very, very difficult to recover from such an occurrence. I just want to quickly talk about a few statistics here that will bring context to what I was saying earlier on, and based my discussion on the effects of COVID-19. This kind of research indicated that about 32% of global retailers they underwent some sort of disruption. So in other words, 32%, globally, it's a big number. But however, if you want to understand the context as well, is that 64% of the retailers challenged to adapt into a new way of working. That is the supply chain commerce way of working. They were used to work in the old way, and the supply chain processes started changing because of people not really going to work, etc., etc. So the supply chain in the commerce industry started really changing very drastically. And 64% of the respondents basically found that it was really a challenge to really adapt. Now, a very serious aspect is that when you start adapting to the new ways of working, then all of a sudden your contracts are being impacted. And 56% of the respondents at that time started saying we had to renegotiate our contracts, because if we had really basically had in our contract that we were going to deliver in 24 hours, only to find that we can only deliver in 48 hours, already there's penalties, etc., and so many other things. And this is a very important aspect in understanding the impact of the COVID-19 that it has brought in the commerce world and how people operated. So what the impact was people started saying, okay, what would we really do to make sure that we meet our customer requirements? And they started looking at alternative sourcing options. And in some instances, there were actual shortage in terms of stocks. About 28% where they were starting to have this kind of impact, where stocks were really running out and things like failing to meet customer requirements, etc., etc. Renegotiating contracts. So you can see the impact was very, very great. And these statistics are very important in understanding why it is a prerogative of the executive and the board to make sure that the change is discussed. The change is taken into account in the strategic transformation. If digitalization is the way to go, it means that the board, the executive, need to take cognizance of that. And it's a very important aspect because as a fact, the supply chain market is basically going to grow. we're talking about about 11.2% growth into 2017, and these are things that we need to look at and take decisions on as we go by. Now, I'm going to go back into the internal part of the importance of risk management in an organization. To a large extent, whether we're talking about big organizations or we're talking about small organizations, it doesn't matter. However, there are specific policy issues that needs to be taken into account internally. And I'll also talk about those issues that we need to look at externally. The management of the organization sometimes do not prepare themselves adequately to say, in an event of a disruption, how are we going to meet customer needs? Do they have a plan of how we're going to do that? Do they have activities that needs to be put into place to make sure that we don't fail? Have the management or the board also taken into account the issues relating to the environmental regulations, the labor laws, et cetera, in case of a disruption? And there's a couple of those things that we need to be very careful about, that we need to take into account in the supply chain management itself. And that's where the risk part comes into play within the organization itself. So externally, you'll find that these are impacts or events or activities that impact us as an organization. And then sometimes we find we don't have, control of it. These can be natural disasters. These can be hurricanes, et cetera, or tornadoes in the case of the United States, et cetera. But those issues, we need to take them into account as we do our strategic, plans. We need to take those things into account as we deliberate, as we analyze, as we assess, as we mitigate the risks that are there. And a detailed plan of how we're going to do that, it should be contained in what we call a business resilience plan. And that has to be detailed in such a way that it has to be made clear also to the workers, also to all those that are impacted in the process, and make sure that there is a continuous process, making sure that we look at those things and make sure that nothing falls in the cracks before an event takes place. Now, look, I can go on and on in terms of the external issues, but I think what is important is to zone back into the types of risks that we need to look at. The most important thing for me is if the strategy of the business is not taken into account in terms of the risks, this can be operational risks, it can be, all other business risks as the case might be. But within a supply chain environment, we have to align those risks back to the strategy risk of the business. And then also, I have spoken about the external issues, external impacts. Then we have to look at the market risk. Is the basically, how's the market, performing out there? And if we going to overstock or understock, how is the market going to react? And the market risks are sort of very, very important. It's important for the management to also understand the indices out there, the statistics that are sitting out there, and how they relate to the business that we're running. The implementation part of it, the implementation part of the organization. How do we implement our policies, the procedures, the business resilience plans, the business, and all those plans that are important in making sure that there's continuity of the business going forward. So that implementation, you have to make sure that the users, the staff, the management, and everybody else who has been detailed to be sure that they understand the risk, they understand what they need to do and how and when, and how they can basically implement it when there is a disaster. The performance is also an important aspect. If performance goes down, that impacts on our clients. If performance goes down, that impacts on our profitability. If performance goes down, that impacts on the growth and continuity of the business. So having said all that, there's a demand risk that sits out there and say, are we meeting the demands that really come into the supply chain? Will we be able to meet the demand as we go by? I'll just give an example of a far-fetched example, which is in the agricultural space, where we basically know that we need to supply what we call citrus fruits to the overseas market. And if we're not having rain, we're not going to meet the demand. And how do we mitigate that risks, and et cetera, et cetera. So that, to me, the supply chain risk, as a matter of fact, I see it as a strategy on its own that takes into account the 5 elements that I placed on the table. The life cycle of the risk management, I've just summarized it into 3 elements. That is identifying the risk, assessing the risk, and doing the mitigation. And if we can identify the risk properly and do the assessment adequately, I do believe that the mitigation won't be far from the actual requirement of mitigating the risk to the core. I'm very close to finalize my discussion with you, but effective mitigation risks and the protection of the supply chain is of great importance if the organization can familiarize ourselves with the potential suppliers. So in other words, the third parties that we talk to are very, very important. In other words, we should be able to do what we call diligence about them. We should be able to know how they run their businesses. And this will help us to either trust what they do or decide on whether we should go somewhere else. And that on its own is a very important aspect to say we have to be very honest in evaluating our suppliers, our third parties. Now, I've spoken about the customer journey as well. And the customer journey links back to what we call the sales process. If you have committed to the client that you are going to supply them with X number of products on specific dates, it's very, very important that you don't drop the ball. So that understanding of their liability, which has to go back to your staff and everybody in the organization, it has to be met without failure. And if ever there are other ways that we need to put into place, or what we call contingencies, we need to put contingency to make sure that that liability is taken care of in case of a want. The creation of value, the logistic process, those are very, very important. I've seen recently, because of the problems that happened on the seas, the logistic part of the product development and the product supply chain, I would say, end of it, was completely interrupted. And that took about a week before the goods could be supplied. It took about a week before the client could really receive. And that really caused a lot of problems. The problems in terms of the legal side of it, and the problems in terms of meeting customer requirements and meeting the dates, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine if the guys didn't have the contracts that were signed, and they didn't have the insurance that they put into place to make sure that in case of such kind of an occurrence taking place, they would be basically down. And I give that as an example to say that was a mitigating aspect of really taking insurance and all the stuff that helped them to mitigate the occurrence. Now, continuous monitoring is something that it's something very, very close to my heart, because without continuous monitoring of your controls, without continuous monitoring of your processes, you might fall short. And this is no exception to issues that I mentioned right in the beginning in terms of cybersecurity. On an ongoing basis, we are seeing this happening. Companies are being tested on an ongoing basis by criminals and things like that, trying to enter into your databases and steal your information, use it for whatever purpose. So the supply chain environment is no exception. And then that is very, very important to make sure that continuous monitoring processes are in place to make sure that you prevent any occurrence that can really take your business down. Okay, in conclusion, the market size of the supply chain is about 15.8 billion as we looked at it last year. And 57% of the countries believe that supply chain gives them a competitive edge. And that is right. Something as simple as reducing supply chain costs from 9% to 4%, it doubles your profits. And that is some of the aspects that I would like to take organizations through to indicate the importance of supply chain. As a first cut, I think supply chain optimizations at the moment are slightly low, especially among small businesses. And only 6% of companies report full visibility on their supply chain, while 43% suppliers of small business do not track their inventory. And that is atrocious, as a matter of fact, and said on the one side. And this lead to more supply chain disruptions, costing massive 62% hit of finances. So yeah, there's a number of sources that I can refer you to. However, I'd like to indicate that having a good governance, risk and compliance software tool can also help you to get to the top of your risk management program, especially for cyber risk programs. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jason O'Reilly, and welcome. Like the last 23 years of my life, I am the last person presenting, because that's how most organizations have thought about cybersecurity. And finally, we have a seat at the table. So this morning, hopefully I can give you some insight into how we as a cybersecurity provider work with customers, but most importantly, how our risks to organizations have changed. And I think the supply chain risks that have been introduced in our world bring a number of aspects that we've needed to look at our business. And at the same time, what are we seeing the threat actors doing? So like I said, I've been in the industry for 23 years, and probably the last 7 years of my life has really been focused on what are the threat actors doing, how are our businesses operating, how intrinsically we're involved in our customers, and then most importantly, filling out a lot of our customers' third-party risk management vendor documents and reams of Excel spreadsheets to try and help them understand how we're managing the risks within our own business. But I think what is important is we've seen digital transformation engulfing organizations, and at the same time, the aspects of transformation in businesses. Everybody's going cloud, remote workforce. You've heard that from my colleagues, and how supply chain has impacted their business. When we look at cybersecurity and our business that we provide services to, it really focuses how intrinsically we're involved in our clients. So some of those critical areas are things like APIs. So when we look at our business and how we provide value to organizations, it's about how do we integrate? How do we make sure those systems and the relevant technologies we provide integrate into those environments, making sure we aggregate data and we pull all of the things that effectively we know the threat actors look at into our world and then provide a service. one of the things that we've realized in this space is so many organizations haven't even considered how supply chain risks now already live in their environment. We're all looking at how those supply chains effectively work with us, and we do that through assessment, but we don't really understand how those systems are involved in our business. And from a service provider level, there's a lot of impact related to that. Understanding that level of integration and that level of involvement in customers' networks, I'm finding today is not even a thought process. We're so busy focusing on our assessments and how organizations practice cybersecurity. So I'd like to think that as an organization, we eat our own dog food, as they say. But the critical component here is how we ultimately integrate with our customers. And trust me, sometimes those assessments are filled out with any verification or any type of qualification. It's just somebody's word on another. So again, a lot of the time we fill out these documents hoping to do business with others. But again, we look at ourselves internally quite heavily. The other component is integrating with third-party service providers outside of the sphere of control of the business. So we talk about organizations like development companies. So we partner with global leading thought providers in the cybersecurity space. The interesting thing is that there is an API for everything that we do. One of the statistics recently that I read about is 80% of all internet traffic happens to be API driven, right? So when you understand that how you develop an application, how your business is transforming itself, is all of these come down to the integration, the applications, and what you want to provide to your consumer. A lot of people don't understand that level of what is in their environment and how that third party potentially is outside of any level of control. For me, there are also a lot of liability concerns. So one of the things that we always piggyback off is the end user license agreement. So if you're buying a technology from us, we always make sure our contracts are back to back with our service providers or our global leading technologies. And that liability in many cases is not even considered because it's easy to run proof of values, it's easy to implement technologies, it's easy to consume services. But the contracts effectively that are between us and the consumer are not always what they need to be. And we're seeing a lot of that is not considered. So one of those key things that we're considering, we've already spoken about software development, whether you're outsourcing to India, to Pakistan, to Cape Town, to Mogadishu, to the US, it doesn't matter. The point is many organizations don't understand how intrinsically people are connected to their environment and the matter or the pace of change that happens in this development space. Security maturity is a big one because when we look at supply chain, a lot of the times we're talking to your listed companies who systematically are now realizing they've got to do something. But when we go below the listed organization framework, is very, very few customers understand what it is they need to be implementing from a supply chain perspective. And again, some of my colleagues have spoken about differentiators. In the mature markets, absolutely. We use our cybersecurity journey and how we practice cybersecurity as a pure business differentiator because of how we manage the customer's data. But in less mature customers, they haven't even thought about this. And the problem that we have is that when we look at the threat actors, they don't discriminate. They don't pick and choose. Sometimes they do, of course, but 90% of the attacks that they do are automated and driven by artificial intelligence. And when you start to look at the potential risks to an organization or to a country, it's usually not your listed companies. It's all of that sub environment that ultimately stands the biggest risk out there. And believe it or not, they don't yet understand it. There is a lot of dependency in the vendor space. And one of the things that we know is that the vendor community, being the technologies that you consume, that we consume, there is a lot of dependence that they're doing the right thing. And I'll show you a couple of examples where organizations have been impacted and will continue to be impacted because we believe that these are security providers. We believe that these are people that practice security. However, when you understand that they outsource the development of their code, we need to be asking ourselves very different questions. Legal departments, I found out they've become our friends. But the one thing we also understand, if ever you want a sale to stall, you send your contract to legal, right? Or if ever you want a supply chain strategy to change, you send your documentation to legal. And I think a lot of organizations haven't considered, when organizations are transforming or projects need to be delivered, how the legal departments can become the single place where effectively your transformation journey can stop, your integration strategy can stop. And making sure those people come along in the supply chain journey is so important, because we spoke about these liability considerations. We've seen that change significantly. So a lot of the time, customers will want a liability clause in a contract where we have zero control. Don't get me wrong. Most of the time, we push that back and we make sure that the customer accepts the risk, because that is not a risk that we can accept. But those are things we work through with our clients. There is this concept of shared responsibility. Now, the funny thing is not many people understand what that means. And, we're consuming the cloud, we're consuming other people's data centers, we are rendering service from service providers like myself and others. And there is a shared responsibility clause that exists in most contracts today. However, most organizations don't understand that, and most people don't understand that. So when you're consuming your service, you have to make sure that the contract exists, the liability that exists is one that you understand. And just because you're consuming a service doesn't mean that there aren't any liabilities. A lot of customers believe that once I switch on the cloud, security automatically happens. They also believe that if I consume a service, the outcome is, automatically measured. The reality there isn't. There is still a level of accountability that exists in organizations, which, by the way, not many understand, because in cybersecurity, we try to outsource the problem and we try to make sure the problem is somebody else's. And if it doesn't work, then we shout and scream at somebody else, right? The problem is that cybersecurity and the work that we provide and the services we provide, the level of ownership is a shared ownership. And those are some of the challenges we have in some engagements as well. The cost of compliance, so again, me spending at least 2 days a week working on vendor onboarding documents and relevant liability, clauses, and working with legal, there is a cost. There is a cost to small businesses. There is a cost to smaller cybersecurity vendors. There's a cost to our business. So the bigger the customers we work with, the more it costs us. And the interesting thing in our world is that margins are getting smaller. So when we're working with customers, it's a highly competitive environment, but the cost of compliance to us has become more. So, how we engage, with whom we engage, and how profitable our business is has also become a major consideration of our business. However, a lot of our end users don't understand that. They still want to do business at 8 or 12%. And when you understand that their business can't run at 8 or 12%, there is always an expectation as a service provider to run at 8 or 12%. So, the dynamics are very interesting. So we have some interesting conversations there. We spoke about this a little bit earlier, is outsourcing the problem and getting managed services. There's no problem with that, because you're augmenting your capability. You may not have the budgets, and getting a service provider in your environment is definitely advised where you need it. The problem is how those organizations integrate with your businesses. Again, how do you manage that? How do you measure that continuously? Those are some of the biggest challenges we see. And most important, what does success look like? Success to a lot of people is, I haven't been hacked. But what we do know about the hacker is, they exist in an environment for at least 600 days before they execute. They do their reconnaissance, and we understand that, right? So there's a lot of considerations from that. The data handling conversation. So we all know in South Africa, we finally got POPIA. Again, still looking forward to seeing a fine being issued. There's been apparently 139 odd breaches. When you search for that, you can't quite figure out what it is. We all know the big ones because they're all in the lights, but data handling is critical. If we're going to be successful in holding everybody accountable in this shared responsibility model, I believe that the regulator needs to start stepping up and actually talking about these organizations that are not practicing handling data. But as a service provider, the data that we handle is critical. And many organizations don't understand that. And how do you hold your third party accountable? Access to those critical systems we've spoken about is, most of the time when we're on site and providing services, the systems we have access to, in some cases, are managed, but in many of the customers where maturity is low and cybersecurity is this afterthought, we can access the crown jewels without any issues. Most customers don't consider the risk. So here are two simple examples. Happened obviously last year and post-COVID, where effectively we had managed service providers who were attacked by obviously attackers, and again through APIs, as well as through social engineering and humans and other aspects, where effectively ransomware as well as exfiltration happened, and the amount of customers that got affected by these two service providers was astronomical. The challenge that we have is people don't understand how integrated third-party providers are in their business. And when we're looking at supply chain, especially from a service provider's perspective, this is something as the risk officer we're now managing a lot more closer. For us, it's a business differentiator, but also a lot of our customers are now starting to understand why we're asking for managed access, why we're asking for, closed off areas, and we don't want access to the crown jewels, is because very simply something like SolarWinds and the Kaseya attack very simply highlights that when an organization is intrinsically involved in your business at a level that your technology cannot detect them, you unfortunately are at the will of those third parties. So when it comes to your contracting, when it comes to your liability, when it comes to who you're using, how you validate and how you verify them, it's so important. So that governance strategy at the beginning of your journey is usually the afterthought. And the one thing that we're seeing today is that the ramifications will still be felt of these two attacks for years and years to come. The interesting thing is these attacks is that most of the attacks happen to the largest security providers that you and I trust. And unfortunately, like with the dark web and the marketplace that has been created, this code is readily available out there. So people are just morphing the code, and this will be felt years and years to come. The challenge for you as consumers and for me as a service provider is we need to figure out how we manage this process between us, how we make it not too onerous that we can't do business together, and then most importantly, that we continuously hold each other accountable. So as a business, we're having to transform and make sure we can meet your mandates. But also as an industry, I think it's also about making sure that whoever we engage with, we have the ability to measure ourselves continuously. So hopefully that's given you some insight, because for me, supply chain risk is definitely a governance process. I meet continuously with people today that talk about we're going to build our third-party risk strategy around a governance process. We're going to create a set of rules that our third parties should engage with us with, but not thinking about that those rules are already out the window. You've already got integrated platforms which are not detected by technologies today, which sit at a code level, which already run in your business. So the governance processes are fine, but technology has become more and more critical. The threat actors have evolved. They're using technology to their advantage. Governance and tick box exercises do not equal security or cybersecurity. And this is something that we've been preaching for a long time. So hopefully this has given you some insight. Again, we see a lot of changes happening in the cybersecurity world. It's great to be at the table with the CEO and the CFO, and the CISO has got his time, but there's still a lot of work to be done because the risk is not going to get any easier. The threat actors are evolving. So thank you very much.
And we're back. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Excellent insights there. Just before we go further, the results of our first poll are in, and 100% of you agreed that adaptability and being able to change was one of the key drivers of organizational success and survival over the last 2 years. Let's get into our second poll while we're here. What external risk factor do you think has the most significant influence on the current supply chain? Is it natural disasters? Is it social, governmental, and economic factors? Is it the unpredictability in or the misunderstanding of customer demand? Is it interruptions to the flow of products? Or maybe suppliers' regulatory compliance? So just add your vote to the poll on screen, and we'll have a look at those results in a second. So we've covered so many topics today. Unsurprisingly, Eskom was mentioned a lot, the rising petrol and diesel prices, higher food costs, all of which influence the man on the street just as much as they influence the corporate supply chains. I was happy to see Christelle quoted the late Douglas Adams, who taught us the value of having a towel and the words, "Don't panic." Dr. Terry opened my eyes to a whole new world of HR contract risks. That is something I've never really focused on. And Jason served to scare me about hidden code in APIs and how everyone in the supply chain needs to share accountability for the cyber risks. So as you can see, I've been joined on stage by our panel, Christelle, Terry, and Jason. So let's have a look at those results of that poll. We can have them on screen. Let's see, 76% of our audience said that social, governmental, and economic factors are the biggest external risk factor. Wow, let's go to our panel. Dr. Terry, that's what the audience says. What do you think?
Yeah, indeed, it's not a surprise on my side. Business as it stands today has changed so much. And the way it is that issues of digital transformation are taking precedence, and businesses are starting to look into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all contemporary technologies to make sure that they can meet the demands of the clients out there. The COVID-19 indeed had a lot to do with the change that we're seeing today, and we can feel it. The way in which customers respond, it has definitely changed. The way we supply goods and services, it has definitely changed. And in doing that, we have to look internally into our business strategies and say, is the supply chain strategy aligned to the business strategy? And if not, then I'm sorry, it's a big problem.
Thanks very much, Dr. Terry. I think you're in agreement with our audience there, so we're all on the same page. That's fantastic. Let's have a look at some of the questions from the chat and from the Q&A. So I'm going to ask Christelle, how about we speak to you for the first question here? And I'll read it from the screen. It seems to me that many of the problems listed by Gay in our first keynote are relevant to other industries as well. The biggest problem for the supply chain of most industries is the rising cost of fuel and the fact that insurance does not cover all these cases. Do you feel the same way? So really asking about insurance and these risks. Thanks, Christelle.
Thanks, Mike, and I think I agreed very much with Gay's presentation. I think as risk managers, we must understand that you only insure risk if you can't cover it or if you can't manage it. And often risk managers sees insurance as a separate process, but somebody has to plug the gap between operations and insurance, and it has to be the risk manager. So as a risk manager in this environment and relating to supply chain, insurance is all about the policy wording. So you have to understand as a risk manager what's included, what's excluded, and what are the conditions. Now, a good example would, for instance, be if you analyze your business interruption cover and you realize you have to do 1, 2, and 3 in operations. Who's telling operations? Who's making sure those risks and those controls are covered in your risk assessments? And there's a knock-on effect. So if you start with business interruption and you don't look, for instance, at your asset all risk cover and go and decide, if my supply chain fails and I can't do the things that are required in my insurance policy, how do I deal with the fact that my policy doesn't respond? Because the person who asked the question is correct. We, for instance, had a case where supply chain failed. We couldn't execute some of the fire requirements in the National Veld and Forest Fire Act, and our liability covers for spread of fire would then become jeopardized. Now you can imagine if you are sitting next to another forestry company and tomorrow morning SAPIC knocks on your door and asks you, why did you burn down half of my revenue for the next 30 years? So that is the type of thing that the risk manager has to understand. You need to go into the policies and understand when your insurer will respond and when not, and stay close to your broker. In terms of the fact that your insurance doesn't cover things like fuel cost after load shedding, there's a knock-on risk there even. If you think about the shortage of things like diesel, what do we do if government has to start prioritizing and say, well, sorry, now we're giving it to Eskom. You don't get doesn't matter if you have the money to buy it, you don't get the fuel. So there's a lot of knock-on effects that you need to think about. And I would think the most likely insurance policies to start with is your BI cover, your asset or risk, and your liability covers.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks so much, Christelle. We could also chat to Gay about that. I think she mentioned that Swallow Atlantic burnt down twice. So they know something about insurance that maybe we don't. Terry, next question we're going to address to you there, Dr. Terry. What is the most challenging part of the current supply chain management? Any particular phase in that management process, maybe demand planning, or maybe the fact that customers demand same-day delivery? What do you say, Doctor?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of factors that we need to look at. And these factors, to a large extent, relate to your succession planning. You need to have the right people that will take over from the current management. And these people need to be trained adequately. These people need to make sure that they align to the culture of the organization. It has always been my view that ethical leadership has to do with the culture as well. If you do not discourage the culture of dishonesty, you are really leading your company into disaster. The issues of business continuity cannot really overemphasize this part, because your supply chain has to balance your supply and demand. And in doing that, you have to understand your external factors and the internal factors, and really draw up a good balance between the two to make sure that there is continuity in terms of service, and also making sure that your standard of service is always kept very, very high. Otherwise, you're out of business. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. I think that also ties into the poll question, because some of the options there was about unpredictability in customer demand, and what you just mentioned in terms of business continuity and so forth. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, the next question we've got is directed at Jason. So we're talking about a cyber question here, Jason. Is it better to use one software for the entire supply chain to reduce risk, or is it better to use several different software for different stages?
Look, I mean, again, I think from my perspective, the one thing that you spoke about earlier on is, for me, what's important is the outcomes that the organization is expecting, right? And the one thing that we know, technology has changed significantly. One of the things that I'm a key preacher of is automation, because I think if we're looking at things like supply chain and how many things can affect it and how you measure it and how you manage it, absolutely, you need to look at a system that has the capability and the sustainability to be able to drive an organization. However, depending on the size of the organization, the complexity of their supply chain, I think, again, it's horses for courses. For me, what's important is, it's always great to consolidate. I think a lot of the organizations we work with today, large and small, consolidation is a key driver. What COVID taught us is, keep your overheads low. Make sure that, you're looking at, especially when it comes to software, how you can do more with less. We see that regularly in our space when it comes to budgets. But for me, I think the one thing that I've learned about organizations of varying sizes is, in the large organizations, you have multiple silos. You have different people trying to achieve different things. Is there one platform that can do it? Of course there is. Is there appetite to have one platform? Politically, sometimes not. Trying to bring 1,000 people on the same journey versus trying to bring one person on a journey is very different. So, again, do you want to sell something now, or do you want to sell something in 3 years? Is the problem relevant now, or is it relevant in 3 years? We see that happen a lot. So I think those factors dictate whether or not you buy a single piece of software that will help you achieve multiple mandates as you go, or do I just have this problem and I need to address that now? And I think that comes back down to what Dr. Terry said earlier on is, based on your assessment of your situation, based on where you are as a business, you can make the right decision. And only then will software then play into what you needed to do. And again, your board will love you for it, because you're aligning the risk quantification conversation with what you're buying. That's as easy as it is, right?
Fantastic. I think another element that came out of your talk was that the cyber criminals are evolving. So that one software has to evolve to keep up with the times and to keep up with all those hidden APIs and all the hidden code. So yeah, thanks very much. We're going to go to a question here that I think is going to be for the whole panel. So I'm going to just, you've got the mic. Let's say in the current environment, would it be safer in terms of mitigating risks to expand the company's own logistics team while increasing the logistics supply network? Or would it be better to outsource the new transport lines to a contractor? It's really the in-source versus outsource question here from a risk perspective. So this is open to the panel. Anybody who'd like to take this one?
Well, I mean, this makes obviously from a logistics perspective. From our perspective, I think where organizations should insource is if they have the skill. One of the things that we know globally is that by 2025, there will be almost 4 million jobs vacant in the cybersecurity space, right? Which means that is critical skill that makes cyber work. And when you start to look at the ecosystem of the way that the attacker works is, in some cases, you need to outsource core functions. And I think, again, assessing your risk, understanding your risk, knowing your capability will help you determine whether you insource or you outsource. Because I heard a really good term earlier this week about a small company that started a cooperative. And I think that's important. I think if we look at the cyber risks today, there isn't one company that can help you deal with everything.
Thanks for that cyber perspective. Christelle?
Thanks, Mike. I think one of the additional things about the timing of decision-making in your organization, the bigger the organization is, usually the longer it takes to make any decision. And we, for instance, had an example where we were struggling with a logistics contract. And by the time we made a decision, we could have paid 3 trucks ourselves just to get the product on the road. And I think in risk, we often forget how long it takes us to make decisions. So it's about decisions, and then it's about complexity, because the more complex something is, the more likely it is that a specialist outsourced service provider can help you. But we often make things complex that really isn't. And something like logistics, it depends obviously on your product, etc. But I think often Gay had a good example about the veggie gardens and the beekeeping that they did. And I think simple things we need to maybe do ourselves, and the complex issues, try and outsource them.
Thanks, Krisha. The one aspect that I think is of great importance in deciding whether you would like to outsource or not is what I mentioned earlier on with regards to your due diligence in understanding your supplier, your guys that you're doing business with. And that is a very important aspect to decide whether you would like to do business with X or with Y. And you know for a fact that if you do business with Y, definitely I'm going to have continuity of business. But if I do business with X, there is a risk. And you got to know exactly what are you going to do about it. You know, how do you mitigate that risk? So that's why it's so important that the management, the executive, should be highly involved in deciding which way to go. This has an impact in terms of the reputation of the organization, what I call reputational risk. And you do something wrong today, it's difficult again to recover. Thank you.
What I'm getting from all of you is that management and the people making these decisions need to be properly informed. They need to know about the competence of the service provider. They need to know about the time taken to make these decisions. So really, it's a very complicated question. Christelle?
Mike, maybe if I can just respond to that. I think a lot of risk managers need to look at the quality of their reporting. I always say a risk manager is not the facilitator of a process. It is the ultimate integrator of information. So if what you put on your executive and of your board's desk does not inform decisions, then rather stop doing it, because now you're wasting time.
All right. Fantastic, fantastic. Colleagues, I want to say thank you very much for your inputs and your answers to these questions. To everybody who's viewing, we are running out of time, so we're not going to be able to address all the questions in the chat and the Q&A right now, but rest assured, we have a team working on it, and they will be answering all your questions in the text, and the recording is available. You'll find the link to the recording in the chat. To close off, I'm going to hand us back to Professor Ashley Mutezo, who's going to just do a few closing remarks for today's webinar. Ashley?
Thank you, Program Director. I want to take this opportunity to thank our keynote speakers and our panelists. We want to say thank you to Mrs. Gay Corbett, Mrs. Nadine Hardy-Silcock, and our panelists, Christelle, Dr. Terry, and Jason. Thank you very much for the presentations, quite insightful, and also connecting and showing us the link between the theory from our academic side and the practical or reality, what's taking place there in corporate. Thank you so much for everything. A special thank you to two key people, Nikki Downing from RubyQ and Dr. Erika van der Westhuizen from UNISA for organizing this year's webinar. Furthermore, we would like to thank our colleagues at RubyQ and UNISA for supporting us. Without you, this webinar would not have been possible. And then we have to thank our esteemed program director, Mr. Mike DeToy. Thank you very much. You really did facilitate the event very well. Lastly, we would like to thank our attendees. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. We look forward to hosting you again next year. Hopefully, we will have a physical event where we can meet and connect. Until next year, take care, stay safe, and continue to level up in this new world of supply chain risk management. From all of us, thank you again and goodbye. Thank you, Program Director.